welcome everyone, and thank you for being here. My name is Kathy Sakahara. I'm the first Vice President of the Seattle-King County League of Women Voters, and I'm also having the most amazing combination of technical challenges. So you are seeing me from my phone, and I'm very sorry about that. But you're not going to hear from me for long, so that's okay. You're going to hear from other people who are a little more organized technically. We've really had a great group collaborating to put this event together. I'm sure you're not only going to enjoy it, but you're going to get a lot out of it. We wanted to start tonight by acknowledging that our meeting is being hosted on the traditional and sacred lands of the Coast Salish people. The League of Women Voters acknowledges our responsibility to consider the complete history of Indigenous people, whose deep connection to the land can teach us so much. We are committed to learning from them, building community with them, and partnering with them. I will be, once one of my other devices wakes up, I will be adding something to the chat where you can learn more about the land where you live, work, and play. In a difference in addition to our acknowledgement of Indigenous people, we also have to acknowledge the labor and extremely unfair labor that this country is built on. We pay homage to those stolen from Africa, placed in bondage, forced into labor, and called slaves. To those who lost their lives blasting through mountains to build the Transcontinental Railroad, and to those who labored in our fields to feed the world. We honor our ancestors for their forced, unpaid, underpaid, and exploited labor that built much of the Americas. To our Indigenous, African, Asian, and Hispanic forebears, we commit to the continued struggle for liberation, reparations, labor protections, due process, and equal access. For it is only through this and that the justice that we can truly honor them. I will also be sharing a link about a way that you can be aware of a new system that is similar to the Amber Alert, but this is specifically involved when an Indigenous person is reported missing. And I'll also be adding that link. So on to our event. It's my pleasure to introduce Emilie Hard, Director of Equity for the Tahoma Schools, to moderate tonight's conversation. Emilie currently serves as the Director of Equity, for the Tahoma School District in Maple Valley. She retired in 2019 from the Ithaca School District, where she had been Assistant Superintendent for Teaching and Learning. Her former positions include classroom teacher, curriculum specialist in elementary school, principal. She earned her master's in education from the University of Oregon. I also have to mention, on a personal note, as soon as I saw her name, all sorts of bells ran off. And I realized that when my daughter started in public schools, Emilie was her principal. And I know Emilie's email address is still someplace in my computer. So Emilie and I go way back. I do have a problem, though, because this was about 20 some years ago, and Emilie has not aged a day. You're going to have to tell us how that happened. So thank you very much. Again, I will be adding some of this information to the chat. And thank you, Emilie, for kicking off our panel.
Thank you, Kathy. And it was really a fun connection to see you again tonight. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to start by saying that everyone tonight is going to be muted throughout the session, except for the speakers. And you may use the chat if you have questions and comments. And if you do put a question in, please indicate whether it's for a specific one of our panelists, to all of them, or to Senator Wilson. And we'll monitor that chat and add questions as time allows toward the end. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists for an important conversation focused on how we can understand and help strengthen our classrooms. So starting with Dr. Teddi Beam-Conroy, who has been a bilingual educator for over 30 years. In that time, she has gone from paraprofessional to having her Ph.D., and she's worked in 5 states across the United States as a classroom teacher, district level administrator, and university faculty member. She is currently the director of the University of Washington's Elementary Teacher Education Program's Masters in Teaching. Her recent research centers on the preparation of pre-service and in-service teachers to serve linguistically and racially minoritized students in K-12 schools. Welcome, Dr. Beam-Conroy. Our next panelist is Dr. Shahida Lopez, who is an Afro-Latina born and raised in Panama, who began her career in education in 2006 as a middle school teacher and has served in various roles as a P-12 and higher education administrator. As of July 2020, she is the director of secondary language learning in Highline Public Schools, where she leads the expansion of dual language programs in secondary schools and leads Highline's instruction on race and identity. Dr. Lopez is a first-generation college graduate who earned an Associate's in Arts degree at Miami-Dade College, a Bachelor of Arts in Elementary Education, Masters of Science in Bilingual Bicultural Education from Northeastern Illinois University, and a doctorate in Ed Leadership from National Louis University. So welcome to Dr. Lopez. Our next panelist is Jennifer Motter. I have to pronounce it correctly. Jennifer currently serves as the president of the Seattle Education Association, which is the union representing approximately 6,000 educators working in Seattle public schools. Prior to taking that office in June 2020, Jennifer taught in middle school classrooms for 18 years, starting her career in Oakland, California, and then moving to Seattle in 2006. Jennifer is also a parent of 2 Seattle public school students, one of whom is a senior and about to graduate from Franklin High School. Hooray. Welcome, Jennifer. Our next panelist is Toni ONeal. Toni ONeal is a professional growth and education support consulting teacher. She works with new to profession teachers, new to Seattle Public Schools teachers, and veteran teachers needing support. Toni has been an educator for 3 decades, including more than 20 years as a classroom teacher. She's a mother of 3, a grandmother of 4, and a believer of all scholars' brilliance and genius. Welcome, Toni ONeal. And our next panelist is Mike Simmons, who joined Seattle Public Schools as the Director of Talent Management in July 2019. Prior to working in Seattle, Mike spent 21 years in various human resources roles with the Boeing Company, where he was the recipient of Boeing's 2012 Global Diversity Change Agent Award. And he led a diversity integration team, which also received the Global Diversity Change Agent Award in 2013. He is currently the president of the Mukilteo School Board, and he has served on the board for 10 years. Mike has 2 daughters, Lauren and Rachel, who are his pride and joys. His inspiration and drive come from his mother, who was a special education teacher in Springfield, Illinois. A graduate of USC, he's an avid golfer and he enjoys jazz music. His mantra is the relationship is primary. Also, we welcome audience member Senator Claire Wilson from the 30th Legislative District, who will participate in the conversation later this evening. So welcome to all of our panelists and welcome to all of you who are joining us tonight. Our prepared questions will be directed at all panelists, and the order the panelists are asked to respond will rotate with each question. So if you're first, for the first question, you'll start, then the second person will start the next question. So before I read each question, I'll indicate the amount of time that you'll have to respond, and our timekeeper and program chair, Adele Reynolds, will give 2 signals. The first when there's 30 seconds remaining, and then she'll interrupt when the time is out. So here we go. We're ready to start. So our first question, panelists, is tell us about yourself and what has sustained your commitment to education. We're going to have 1.5 minutes for each of you for this question. And we're going to go in the order of Mike, Teddi, Jennifer, Toni, and Shahida. So we're going to start with Director Mike Simmons. So Mike, can you tell us about yourself and what has sustained your commitment to education? And we need you to unmute.
There we go. Can everyone hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Hey, thanks so much for the invite. In terms of sustaining my commitment to education, I think it was in the initial introduction, I talked about my mom. My mom passed away when I was 15, and 6 months later, I went to live with an aunt and uncle who is an Episcopal priest. And his wife, my mom's sister, was an administrator in LAUSD, which is where I graduated from in Los Angeles. My uncle, the Episcopal priest, was on the LA Unified School Board, the State of California School Board, and the County of LA School Board. So I think education is somewhat in the blood, but it's always been a commitment of mine. My daughters, Lauren and Rachel, as I said, my pride and joys. I've always looked at education, especially for the two of them, as I ultimately was their primary educator, with the public school system being the supplemental. And my job was to, number one, get them there on time, make sure they're fed and ready to learn. So I guess the easy piece is it's kind of in my blood. And even though I spent, 21 years at Boeing, at the end of the day, I was always present at school. And my initial foray into the Mukilteo School Board was for one term. And here we are in the third term, and I'm still there. And but I will tell you, my view as a board member and my view as a director of talent management in Seattle, very, very different views. And so I guess I'm the recipient of both views, and both views complement each other. So there you have it. In the short answer, it's in the blood, and it is a passion overload. And I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you, Director Simmons. That's really interesting that you have those two perspectives. We're going to go to Dr. Bean Conrad.
Thank you so much. You heard a little bit about where I came from, what my professional life has been, but I'm a lifelong educator who never thought that I was going to be a teacher. So it's kind of an odd thing. My parents were both teachers. My sister's a teacher. Half my family has been involved in education. So I grew up thinking I was going to do anything but I was passionate about educational equity. I thought I was going to be a lawyer in school districts. That didn't happen. But I think the thing that sustains me, I've had 4 kids that have gone through public education. I have 4 grandchildren. My oldest grandchild is now attending the school where I started my career in Milwaukee. It's an optimism. It's an incomparable capacity for hope. That's what I see in public schools. That I saw it for years when I was a classroom teacher in Children's Faces. I see it in my pre-service teachers. I see it in the teachers that mentor my pre-service teachers. You got to be an optimist to stay in this game. And the idea that people can learn, can change, can grow, having that faith in that kind of humanity, that's what sustains me. And I think if you're an educator, you have to have that sort of unbridled optimism, or why go in every day?
Thank you, Dr. Beam-Conroy. I love the word that you highlighted, hope, because we do have to hold on to that. Thank you. We're going to go to Jennifer Motter.
Hi, thanks for having me on the panel tonight. So if I were to speak to what has sustained me in this career in education, I would say it's my strong belief in public education being the cornerstone of our democracy. So for me, it's the community of educators that I work with. I've worked with I've been very fortunate to work in 3 different schools and in 2 different states with different unions. And it's that community of educators that are talented and dedicated, also committed to that, committed to public education. That sustains me. And creating those schools where those learning experiences where we know that, we can create those welcoming spaces for students where they are feeling safe, that they actually are looking forward to and excited about the activities that you're going to create for them. Like that's both the community with educators and that excitement that you can nurture with students for learning. That's what sustains me in this career.
Thank you, Jennifer. And I think public education right now in our current state of the world is probably more important than ever. So thank you. We're going to go to Ms. Toni ONeal.
Hi, thank you. I too, like that was said before, come from a family of educators. My mom was a longtime school teacher, and she was a big, huge influence on me becoming a teacher myself. And I have aunties, those who know what that means. I have lots of aunties that are teachers or administrators or that were teachers and administrators. And so it's just in the blood, as he said. And also I attended Seattle Public Schools. I think someone said that too, and graduated from Garfield. Most of my family did. And so in my 30 years in Seattle Public Schools, I was a substitute. I was a paraeducator, classroom teacher, and now a consulting teacher. And so my being sustained, I think, comes just simply from the scholars. Like, I just feel like we have to get this right, because I had sons that came up in it. I came up in it. I have grandchildren now coming up in it. And we just have to do this correctly for our babies, because there's just no excuse not to. And so as a classroom teacher, I felt like I could affect one class at a time. As a consulting teacher, I'm able to get in multiple classes in a year. And so that's what I decided to do. And that optimism, and I love horses, so this is just a metaphor. I'm one of them people that will like kick the horse until my leg fall off, because I just believe and hope that this is going to change and this is going to turn around and things are going to get better. And so that drives me.
Thank you. I love that you brought into focus the why for this work. It's those scholars that are in our schools. Thank you. We're going to go to Dr. Shahida Lopez now.
Good evening, everyone. My name is actually pronounced Shahida.
Sorry, I screwed up.
Shahida. So Shahida Lopez. Thank you for that. I love that I'm sitting on this panel alongside professionals who came from a family of educators. That wasn't the case for me, but I've been serving students, families, teachers, administrators, staff in multiple ways. And I feel like most are on volunteer roles, such as being a board member at the Washington Association for Bilingual Education, where I represent a region of our state. And I'm also a founder of a nonprofit organization, Children Ready to Learn, where I'm hoping to really partner with families and empower them to support their children, and so that they're ready for kindergarten and beyond. But throughout my career, my commitment to education has been fueled by this belief that culturally and linguistically diverse students deserve better than what they have been afforded in most school settings. So I'm motivated to place myself in positions where I can have an impact on teaching and learning for students. And 7 years ago, I also developed this commitment to supporting the career development of culturally and linguistically diverse teachers, because I see the impact that they have on students that look like them. And I believe that there are just not enough school administrators or university faculties who are actively supporting teachers of color, linguistically diverse teachers, so that they can experience success. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lopez, for working on behalf of a diverse force in supporting them and supporting those students. So we will move on to the second question now. So here we go. And then we will start this next time with you, Dr. Bean Conrad. So we're hearing from colleges and universities that fewer candidates are going into teacher ed and ed administration programs. Many districts are seeing a rise in the number of teachers leaving the profession, with increases in emergency teacher certificates needed. Where would you begin to reverse these trends, and why do you think it's important to reverse the trend? And we're going to allot about 2 minutes this time for each person, since there's 2 questions.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. I think I'm going to start with your other question, with your last question first. Why is it important to reverse this trend? Because nobody touches more lives, I think, over the course of their profession than teachers. Everybody had them, period. Everybody had teachers. And so we need teachers. I mean, it was funny that, during the pandemic, the beginning, but the pandemic, when kids were at home, suddenly teachers were like next to gods. Everybody was putting us up on a pedestal, because folks started to realize the importance of the job, and that not everybody's cut out to do it. So you need talented folks too, and caring folks to do this. But that said, that adulation kind of faded, like in the Forrest Gump meme that you may see, and then all of a sudden. So if we're going to reverse the trend, we need to recognize and value, we need to sustain that value that we had for teachers at the beginning of the pandemic, and to recognize that teachers are that important that we need to pay living wages. We need to make sure that they have conditions that support their ability to be teachers, because many teachers are also parents. It was kind of interesting when I first started teaching in Northside in San Antonio. I had 4 kids. If something had happened to my spouse, my kids would have qualified for the program for free and reduced lunch. We shouldn't be putting our professionals in that kind of a situation. We need to recognize that, as Dr. López said, culturally and sustaining and linguistically sustained teachers are our future, because that's who's in our buildings. Our kids are our future. And that we also need to realize that this is a profession that deserves the support that we have not been given so far. I think partially it's because it's been a woman's profession, and that's a holdover of the patriarchy. We had a historic day today that was too long in coming. And that's a holdover. We have too many vestiges of these old ways of being that we have to get rid of if we're going to make progress. Also, money. Let me talk about money for a minute.
Okay.
I would just like to see schools get enough money once, just once, to see what we could do with it.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Ms. Motter, you're next.
Yeah, I'll build off of what Dr. Beam-Conroy has said. In starting, public schools are seen as the place where we're going to address all of the needs of our students. So, I mean, whether that's, whether people think that's a good idea or not, that's the reality. That's like what we have seen, and COVID definitely daylighted that was how we see public schools. And unfortunately, like my panelist colleague said, chronic underfunding of our public school system has made our work as educators to meet students' needs nearly impossible. So the other reality is that we have, over time, we keep adding to educators' plates. We keep adding more and more expectations, more workload expectations, more, assessments, more just COVID health and safety protocols, just more and more keeps getting added on without taking anything off. And in the midst of all this, we have these, well-intentioned administrators who are coming up with these expectations, that have these ideas of how we are going to best meet our students' needs, who are not necessarily classroom educators themselves, or have never been classroom educators, or are, maybe were, but not during COVID. And so right now, I can speak from my perspective, working in the union, representing the educators in Seattle Public Schools, that a lot of educators are very frustrated that they're the voices that should be listened to, along with the students, because they're the ones that are in the buildings having to navigate this new world of COVID, and really before COVID, having to implement policies that were being top-down implemented. And yet, again and again, and through COVID, educator voice is being dismissed. And so I see that happening. That's why I know a lot of educators are leaving the profession, because they are being ignored, undervalued, disrespected. It leads to burnout. And that's what we need to reverse. We need to start listening to educators. We need to start listening to students, elevating those voices, so that then we can actually start creating policies and practices within our schools that are going to lead to success for all, that is going to create a healthy and safe work environment, a supportive work environment for the staff, but also that same safe, supportive learning environment for the students.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Toni, we're going to go to Toni ONeal.
I absolutely agree with Dr. Teddi Beam-Conroy and Jennifer Motter. Fully fund education would be a huge way to start. Teachers come in, I'm a storyteller because I think it's my primary background, I don't know, but you get these bright-eyed teachers coming in the building with their great ideas about what they want to do and how they want to do it, because they want to be the teachers that they did not have. And then bam, here is the curriculum, your scripted curriculum you're going to teach. And don't get me wrong, I have nothing against scripts if they're optional. If you don't know what to say, scripts are great. But if you know what to say and can say something and say it more authentically, you should be allowed to do so. But what I'm seeing as a consulting teacher of new to profession teachers is them getting deemed or even in trouble for not saying it verbatim as to what it said in the book. And they have to look like this person next door. And so their light is just dimming more and more and more. And it, like you said, there's so much put on their plate that it makes it impossible. And they get students in their class, because of course we know that, we're saying that special ed students are general ed students first. And so they put them in their classroom, but they don't give them any supports. And they came from this great general ed education, and they didn't learn how to do that specialized instruction. They didn't learn, and they're supposed to figure this stuff out somehow while they're learning all these new curriculums.
30 seconds.
Staying up all night and weekends trying to get this done and just feeling like failures. And that just kills their spirit. And then their best friend, 10 seconds, is a plumber. Shout out to plumbers. Don't have any school debt, is working a feasible hours and making as much or more than they are. I mean, get the picture? What are they going to do?
Thank you, Ms. ONeal. Dr. Shahida Lopez, you're next.
I could not agree more with what has been said so far. I want to just go off in a little bit of a different direction and add an example of how we're helping reverse this trend, and not the problem, but because the problem is still there. The problem has been named still there, but just trying to provide and how can we increase the number of teachers available to serve our students? So in Highline school districts, for example, we have grow your own programs for aspiring teachers that want to teach either in dual language or special education programs. And these grow your own programs do two things. They provide affordable teacher training program. And they also provide aspiring teachers with a job while they are completing the programs. Those are like two elements that bring equity to the teacher prep cycle, right? So currently Highline offers these two programs. One is called the Woodring Highline Bilingual Teaching Fellows Program that supports paraeducators with bilingual skills to become certificated teachers in elementary. And then there's another one that is the Woodring Inclusive Education Teaching Scholars Program, and these two programs are both partnerships with Western Washington University. But this week's program supports paraeducators to become certified in special education and in elementary. So each of these programs rely on the Alternative Routes Block Grants. And currently we're also planning in the planning stages of a Master Teaching Fellows, which will provide teachers who already hold a bachelor's degree an opportunity to complete a master's in teaching, grades 6 through 12, and having a bilingual endorsement also. However, after conferring with leadership at the Washington State Professional Educators Board, we learned that this teaching, Master Teaching Fellowship will not qualify for this Alternative Routes Block Grant. So if you ask me how we can begin to reverse this trend, I believe that continued collaboration between local universities, school districts, state organizations, state legislature is necessary to reverse these trends. A collaboration that explores how we can provide equitable access to teacher preparation programs above and beyond what we're currently doing, especially for teachers of color and multilingual teachers, so that they can afford the programs.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Lopez. Director Simmons.
Well, thank you very much. And I guess I should just say ditto 5 times and we just keep going. However, I won't do that. Dr. Shahida talked about the program. And I think one of the reasons that I was invited here was in Seattle, we've got this Academy of Rising Educators, which is specifically designed to help our efforts to diversify the workforce. So there are various pathways in which we do that. And so that is there. It's been written about, so I won't go too deep into that. But I think the overarching thing that I have heard and absolutely agree with is we have no problem attracting. We have a problem retaining. And so I think retaining, I think there's one word that we are really trying to, I'll say, turn the knobs on and turn up the heat on is around retention. And to me, retention goes to building culture, district culture, and that culture includes everything that everyone said. And the professional development piece certainly is a part of that culture because we have early career teachers who may not want to be in the classroom their entire year. So how do they get to that next level? Are we providing them with the coaching and mentoring? Yes, there's the consulting teachers that Ms. ONeal is talking about, but is there other things that can get them, because they may desire to want to be a principal or someday be the superintendent. So is that career pathing that's documented? So I think all of those things come under retention. And then in addition to everything everyone else said around funding and again, culture in buildings, culture in districts, but it starts sort of with the North Star. Is that 2 minutes?
You've got really 20 seconds left.
Okay, so I won't say anymore, but one thing I heard at a conference last week that I was at was that when you talk about public education, let's be mindful that we're talking about the whole public, because oftentimes when you say public, it gets differentiated at times, but the whole public is something that we need to be mindful of.
Thank you so much. Our next question is kind of an add-on to that question. So we'll just have like a minute each for this part, but how are these issues that you've been talking about the same and or different for recruiting and retaining teachers of color? And Ms. Motter, could you begin us on this question?
Yeah, so I was saying before that I think, we need to listen to educators and students. And I think more than anybody, we need to be listening and centering the voices of educators of color and students of color. So if we can build that culture within our school system, I think that's what we need to be doing. But unfortunately, currently, what happens is there's sort of there's this expectation that our educators of color are going to volunteer their time outside of the workday to be at the table, to provide that input, or to volunteer their time in, trying to create or develop, to add on to policies and other kinds of expectations at the district or building level. And we need to stop having that kind of unpaid, that expectation of unpaid labor, because it's unfair to put it on our educators of color. So I think that's what I would add on to what I said before.
Thank you so much. Dr. Lopez, what could you add?
What would I add? I think that this concept of retaining teachers of color is used as a gimmick sometimes in districts and schools. It's what schools, districts, institutions are supposed to say, just like when they talk about equity and anti-racism. So the intentions are there, but there's often not a concrete goal. So yeah, you want to retain teachers of color, but what's the goal? What's the implementation plan? Especially as Jennifer just mentioned, like you're trying to retain, but you're doing all these things to people as you're trying to retain them. I know my time is limited, so I would just say this. We cannot retain teachers who we intentionally or unintentionally isolate, who we don't authentically interact with, who we don't get to know, who we don't invite to the decision-making table and actually listen to and implement some of their ideas. And most importantly, we cannot retain teachers who are currently experiencing microaggressions and racism in our school districts.
Thank you. Important things that you've underscored there. Director Simmons.
I would agree with what Ms. Motter and Dr. Lopez have just outlined, but with respects, but with respects to the different recruiting and retaining, obviously we have to be deliberate and more enhanced around that recruiting. But again, it comes back to the R word, the retention, once they are there. Because if the right culture and the right systems aren't in place to address those things that Dr. Lopez said, we will certainly create a condition to where they are looking to teach elsewhere or change the profession as a whole. I think also we have to work on our how are we working with the population that doesn't look like them to be more receptive when they do arrive at the school campus, i.e. a teacher of color being the only one on the campus. So those are things that we have to be really, really mindful of. Then, of course, the coaching and mentoring so they don't feel like they're out on an island. So all of those things are, I'll use the word front and center, and no district is exempt from any of that.
Yeah, it's very complex. There's a lot of pieces to this. Dr. Beam-Conroy, your thoughts?
Well, obviously, I'm on the beginning end of this. Before they can be recruited or retained, they have to be credentialed. And I think we have to think about who's coming into colleges of education and how we're getting people there. If you've been mistreated in the education system, why would you want to spend your career there? So we have to, if you're a parent of an immigrant child, why would you want your child to take a low-paying job and not train for something in technology or in medicine? These are the stories that we hear with our pre-service teachers. When I got to the University of Washington in 2016, we said we wanted to diversify the educator workforce. I came from a district, right? You have a strategic plan, my name's on something, I'm going to do it. So we've had no fewer than 50% teachers of color and 50% teachers who speak languages in addition to English in our cohorts. We got to start there. We got to start educating folks and getting folks credentialed and removing the barriers to their credentialing, like the testing. There wasn't a single person who taught the folks that put Neil Armstrong on the moon who had to pass an Ed.TPA. That's ridiculous. We need to get rid of the things that are keeping our folks out of the credentialing process. We also have to help our folks be ready for those microaggressions. We know, those of us who have been in those positions know what those teachers are going to be facing. And so it begins with us too. We do racial identity caucusing. It's a mandatory part of our teacher preparation. And one of the things we talk about is, hey, it's January. You're the Black teacher. Somebody's going to ask you to do Black History Month. How are you going to work on that? We talk about the things that are going to be occurring in the classroom when they're there and help them figure out what they're seeing already. It's got to be a through line. It's got to be a street. And we got work to do all over, from pre-K all the way up through credentialing, all the way into the pipeline, because nobody wants to be in a building where they were mistreated to begin with.
Excellent points. Thank you. And Ms. ONeal.
I absolutely agree with everyone. And especially teachers of color. We have buildings where there are no teachers of color still, right? And then we have the buildings where there's just one. And that is hard, depending on the school that they are in. The micro and macro aggressions daily are very hard for them to deal with alone on that island, as was mentioned before. And the teacher either has to figure out or stay there and deal with the stress of it and the trauma of it, or they decide to leave. And so what kind of system can we put in place to make sure that these teachers are not alone? I don't know how you make sure there's more than one. Like, I don't even think it's okay to have one student of color in a classroom. There should be multiple. If you only have 3 in your school, put all 3 of them in the same class. Don't divide them up. I mean, it kind of needs to be the same thing with the adults, because it's hard to be by yourself. And so, yeah, just having some kind of system where they can report, go get help, and we're doing something about it. There's no system that they can go get help from. They just have to suffer.
You're all helping us learn so much tonight. Thank you. Our next question, you've touched on a little bit, but if you want to add some more, you're welcome to pass if you feel like you don't want to address this one. But the question is, how do paraprofessionals fit into the discussions of strengthening the classroom? And Dr. Lopez, you touched on this, but I want to give you an opportunity to add if you'd like to.
Yeah, I don't believe we focus enough on paraeducators. We want to encourage them to become teachers. But what are we doing while they're still paraeducators? Paraeducators are often working with small groups or one-on-one with students who have the highest needs, yet they're not afforded with the best possible training and support to implement the strategies that they're either learning or that they need to learn. So just in short, what I can say is that paraeducators are key in the classroom, and we need to just treat them as such.
Thank you for that. Ms. ONeal.
Definitely agree with what Dr. Shahida said. I don't have anything else to add. Funding and training, they're key.
Thank you. Dr. Bean-Conroy.
Ditto that, and pay people a living wage. I mean, they're doing the job that needs to be done. I think culture has to change in schools too. Paraeducators are not there to deal with the kids that the classroom teacher doesn't want to deal with. They are there to be partners in that child's education. And that needs to be recognized as a professional duty of the climate. The whole culture of the school needs to see them not as the people who are doing the cleanup, but the people who are actually there as part of the good work that should be going on.
Yes, an integral part of the whole picture. Director Simmons.
You know, I would agree with Dr. Lopez and what Teddi, Miss Bean Conrad, I apologize, Teddi, what both just said. I think that professional development piece is really, really critical. I spoke about the Academy of Rising Educators program. Many of our first folks in that program are paraprofessionals who've been in the classroom, who have developed those really, I'll say, productive relationships with kids, and they desire to become that teacher of record. In other words, how can they get through a program, get certificated, and be there? So they're doing the work, right? We just have to provide the forum for them to complete their degree. In many cases, they don't have much to go, be certificated, and become that teacher of record. Whereas 3 years ago, that did not exist. And so I'll use the word labored for years and for years, but I think someone used the word hope. And so that's why we think the program, and there are other programs too, ours is not the end all to be all, but it is the one that has been written about. And so how do we encourage them and provide the landscape and forum for them to be successful for those that desire to become that teacher of record, as opposed to the assistant or the para, if you will. So.
Thank you for those additional thoughts. And Ms. Motter.
Yes, I think this was already said, but I just want to highlight again, the wage gap is so incredibly large. I don't think people realize the wage gap between our certificated staff and our classified staff, classified being another term for paraprofessionals. We really need to address that wage gap. I think I have a different perspective than some of my colleagues here. I actually think that we need to have I don't think that we necessarily want to encourage all of our paraprofessionals to become classroom teachers, because I don't know if that's necessary. If we were to try to rethink our system for, schools, and if we actually were to try to lower that, student to adult ratio, so that then we actually had more adults in the classroom, paraprofessionals in the classroom, working with classroom teachers. One, I think we'd be addressing the workload issues that we have daylighted in this discussion, but I also think that we would start to elevate the status of paraprofessionals. I think for some reason and unfortunately, this is part of a systemic issue, there's this class issue of looking at paraprofessionals as sort of like a second class professional in the school system. And we need to disrupt that. And we need to, retool our schools so that then it's not seen that way. And instead, they're a partner in the classroom with the teacher to obviously create those kind of learning environments that we hope to create for our students.
Thank you so much for those comments. We're going to move now to inclusion as a model. And inclusion models are considered optimal by most districts. From your experience and knowledge, how do communities, districts, and administrators understand the layers of classroom support necessary for success with an inclusion model? And Ms. ONeal, we'll start with you this time.
Okay. So my first thought was they don't, but in my nicest non-judgmental voice, very few. Because there are layers and there are, complexities to inclusion. And so most of us, and I know when I thought about inclusion, I just thought about it on the special education and general education scale, when we know that that's just one aspect or of a person or a being, right? And so this student or students, when we're talking about inclusion, it should not only include disabilities, but inclusion of culture, inclusion of race, inclusion of, their religion, gender, all of those things, right? Because these students are all of those. And so because we don't all have an understanding of what inclusion might mean or what inclusion means, then the training that we've been talking about is very little, because it just hits on the disability portion of it. And then also training for gen ed teachers is even less than that. So, or a lot
30 seconds.
less than that. And so it goes back to what I've seen is us having these great, in education, we have these big ideas backed by insufficient funding or funding that lasts for 1 year and then it's gone. And now we're stuck trying to figure out what to do and how to sustain.
Thank you for getting us started on this topic. Director Simmons.
Okay, thanks again. Inclusion is such a complex word. I won't say it's overused, but it is used a lot. And everyone has their own different definition. But I think from a perspective from where I sit, how do you include everyone in developing the plan, not just executing the plan? Because if they are included in developing the plan, then they feel some part ownership in the plan, and not just our teachers and administrators, but those who are sending students to school, i.e. the community. So it's certainly complex in many, many ways. But I can't help but think when I came to Seattle Public Schools almost 3 years ago, the Seattle Excellence, now it's Seattle Rising. And some of those things have remained constant. And when they talk about the culturally responsive workforce, well, those things are developed with including community members, so forth and so on. That doesn't mean it won't go off the rails, but at the same time, it's an effort that's always has to continuously be worked on. Because I don't think you ever arrive at total inclusion, but the effort has to be there with those relationships that are really, really critical. And sometimes those relationships can hit bumpy roads, as we all know, but the attempt has to be there. And how do you say it? They have to be at the table, not just sitting on the wall. So.
Inclusion in the sense of the staff as well in the process, right? Dr. Lopez.
I love what Toni ONeal said about schools and districts not having a common definition for inclusion. And I just couldn't agree more that that's part of the challenge. As far as community is concerned, I don't believe we even talk about inclusive practices with the community. So I'm thinking about like families, students, our community partners, teachers, administrators, staff, like all stakeholders should at the very, very least understand inclusion in theory, and they should be empowered to demand the inclusive practices in their schools. I believe that most administrators may understand theoretically the concept of inclusion, but there are some that do not have the experience with inclusion in practice. So they can't model these practices, and they can't, for the teachers that they support, and they can't support the implementation of inclusive practices if they don't know what it looks like.
Thank you for those insights. Ms. Motter?
So, building off of what I agree with the panelists have spoken so far, I know in special education, inclusion is the buzzword, but also it is where, at least amongst Seattle educators, it's where we want to achieve inclusion with our special education services. However, I think that at the district level and administrative level, it is seen as sort of a cheap, like less expensive model to implement. But I think the opposite is true. I think it's actually a way more expensive model to implement because it is where you actually are staffing based on student needs and not just numbers. And that's where, as educators, we would love, we'd love to be able to, have a voice in building that kind of model, an inclusive model for all students, where we actually are looking at and expanding it beyond special education services, so that then we're actually looking at the student needs and staffing based on that. And that would be, again, more expensive, but I think it's the investment that as a community, I think that's what we need.
Great, thank you. And Dr. Bean-Conroy.
I am actually going to start talking about educational justice. And I love it that somebody, I wish I could credit this person who said, I can't talk about something I've never seen. Because that's what educational justice is something we have never had in schools. So I don't even like the word inclusion because it implies that exclusion exists. We have never in schools approached kids and families like they're not broken. We have done that with kids who are acquiring additional languages. We have done that with Black and brown kids. We do that with kids who come to us with what we call disabilities. We have to do away with inclusion. We have to quit looking at kids like they're coming to us lacking something. They are coming to us as whole people with the expectation that we are going to expand their learning. That's where we have to start. Already, when we talk about including kids, our mindset is that they're somewhere else to begin with. And that has to change. Kids are functioning members of their homes, their communities, their families, and they come to us as whole people. They deserve to be educated as whole people.
Wow.
Thank you.
Powerful. Thank you. So we're going to move on to a slightly different topic. What are the strengths and weaknesses of the efforts to prepare and support administrators, teachers, and staff in your areas or districts to lead and moderate conversations around politics, race and ethnicity, gender, sex, and culture? That's a lot of topics, so you feel free to just pick one. But the basic question is, what are your thoughts around supporting our staff to lead those kinds of conversations? And Dr. Beam-Conroy, I know you just spoke, but can we start with you this time?
Okay, all right, because I'm still kind of thinking about that other question too. Like, when I think about kids as whole people, and I actually learned that from my time working in gifted education, which may seem not to make sense, but if I could talk about it more, I would. But I recently attended a PD where I was an author of a book, and I'm forgetting his name. His first name is Dakota, I know, Stuck Improving. And I thought about that title. I haven't read the book yet. I'm going to order it. But that we seem to sometimes, we just get stuck in the idea that we are improving. And we don't measure, we don't have metrics to figure out when we've made progress. That we feel like we need to keep planning. And I get frustrated. I'm old, I've been around and been in this game for a long time. I get frustrated. At a certain point, you got to stop planning and just do. And if it doesn't work, then you fix it. So to me, conversations are great, but you got to make people do, push people to know that you're going to, and know that you're going to mess up, because none of us are programmed to do this work right. We have been socialized not to do it right. We are going to mess up. Be honest and be humble about that, and be willing to sit down at the table with the folks that we've harmed when that harm occurs. You got to do. You got to make it right.
Thank you.
Dr. Lopez, can you jump in next?
Absolutely. When I think of this question, I'm thinking specifically in Highline school districts. So we're all expected to learn about the intersections of our identities and the identities of those in our community. So specifically race, ethnicity, gender, and culture. We're all expected to learn, actively come together and learn about that. However, there's not an expectation to be able to successfully lead or moderate a conversation about it, which is that, Teddi Beam-Conrad talked about putting it in practice. To be able to lead and moderate these conversations is that's what happens in the real world. I'm also thinking about, so just in short, a strength is that there are opportunities to learn in Highline. But definitely an area of opportunity is providing specific training and support so that teachers, paraeducators, administrators, staff in the building is empowered to lead and moderate these conversations without causing harm. And I will also add that they're empowered to name microaggressions when they're happening and not condone it.
Thank you. Ms. Motter.
By the way, Emilie, it was kind of hard to hear. I don't know if it's just my audio, but I caught you saying my name.
Oh, okay.
So I guess my first thought is, like, when do educators have the time to have this training? Because they're going back to what I said earlier, there's so much on educators' plates. What comes off? And I think something should come off to make room for this, because I think these are, like, this is the kind of training we want to provide, and we want educators to be able to lead and moderate these kind of conversations, or administrators and others in the district to be able to lead and have these conversations. Because I don't think, I think talking about racial equity is probably the most important conversation that we should have educators leading on. Unfortunately, that's not what we prioritize with the job duties assigned to educators. It's definitely not what we prioritize when you look at the time allocated for professional development, the very little time that is allocated. So, I think this is where we're going to have to look at, I think that this is where we should be reimagining how our public schools work and how we fund them, so that then we can give educators the opportunities, and not just the educators, administrators, and others that work in our public schools, the time they need to actually do this kind of training, professional development that they need.
Thanks. Jennifer, I'm trying to unmute and then mute. Are you hearing me better now? A little bit? Okay. We're on up for you, Ms. ONeal.
Hi. I know we have a lot of material, and we have departments that help in different areas. Like, we have student help outreach that I've seen come in very quickly and help teachers talk about gender and sex when it's needed to be done in a classroom for whatever reason. We also have DREA, we have for race and equity, that helps the teacher in becoming a culturally responsive teacher or anti-racist teacher, using those practices. We also have foundational beliefs. We have the strategic plan. We have all these things that helps the teacher, but I'm not sure that we have something that will help them speak to this in their classroom. And since this says in your area, I'm just going to speak to what my manager does for us. We read books, and we have book studies so that we can go in and talk to our teachers about it in their practice, not necessarily what they would say to their students, but about in their practice. We also
30 seconds.
Workshops. Last year, we went to dismantling white supremacy culture in schools, and we talk about what this would look like in your practice. How can you use this with your teachers? What does this look like for the students? Like, we ask those questions, so you don't only just read the book and go to the workshop. You got to put that into action. So, but for teachers,
whoops. And Director Simmons.
Okay, thanks. I would agree with everything that's been said. I think about the expectations that are on teachers first, and there's only so much you can add to that bucket. But if we're going to add something to that bucket, then something may have to go. I don't know what that is, but I think the other thing that is most important, that we provide them with resources should these topics come up, because they often come up. The other piece that comes up as part of these topics are, because they're oftentimes hot topics, especially politics, how do they enter into those discussions, and where it does not create a gap or something not only with their fellow teachers, but with students, so forth and so on. So it's an overused word, but it's a slippery slope in how they go about doing that. And in many cases, the choice, even if they did, have the resources, would be not to stick to whatever curriculum that they've been given. So it's a slippery slope, but resources, information, and probably the most important piece is the advice to, if you need help, need it to raise your hand. But if they raise their hand, someone's got to be there to call on them and provide that help and support.
Excellent point. Okay, so now we're getting to a question that I love. Now that the five of you have heard from one another and gotten to know one another a little bit, I'd like to invite each of you to take up to 30 seconds to ask another panelist a question, something that piques your interest, and then we'll ask that person to take a minute to respond. So I'm just going to open this up. Does one of you have a question for another panelist?
I have a question. Okay,
go for it.
and I'm sure this person and I will talk about it later, if not tomorrow. So Ms. Beam-Conroy, you talked about racial identity caucusing. I'd really, and I know we don't have a lot of time. I know how to reach you, and I know where you live. So why don't you give us the Cliff Notes version about that, and then we'll go from there.
Okay, so we started mandatory racial identity caucusing in 2016 when I got there. They had done a pilot the year before, but it was optional. And one of the things I really believe is that teachers need to understand who they are racially, gender-wise, linguistically, et cetera, all their intersectional identities. But we settled on racial identity caucusing as the primary identifier because, let's face it, that's a lot of the way that schools are organized. So our students self-identify racially at the beginning of their training and their year with us. And they meet with trained facilitators, often doctoral students. In one case, we have a former student of ours who came back, who's now doing caucusing with our Men of Color group. I'm really excited that we actually have a Men of Color group in elementary education this year, because that never happens. And they begin to interrogate themselves and what's happening in the world. And it really depends on who they identify as. So we have the Men of Color group, because what's going to happen to men of color going into schools? Somebody's going to make them a disciplinarian, right? And so having somebody who has had that expertise in the classroom to help orient them to what their expectations are going to be. I mentioned the Black History Month thing before. I was a facilitator. I generally don't like our faculty to get involved, but the students asked me to facilitate the Black group one year, the Black identity group. And we had a discussion, what do you do when somebody says you're going to be in charge of Black History Month because you are the Black teacher on campus? What are you going to say? How are you going to pick out books that don't highlight enslavement, for example, that don't tell the single story about Rosa Parks? So it's really for our Latinx students, we have a large group. We have 10 Latinx women this year who are in a caucus. And some of the things they talk about is being seen as neither here nor there, neither aquí, neither allá. They're not Latin enough, they're not white enough. How do you deal with that in a school setting? So they're having these conversations amongst themselves. That also facilitates them having conversations with their students when they're in the classroom. I see it in some ways as an inoculation against some of the microaggressions we know that they are going to face. Meanwhile, the white groups are learning to be accomplices. I'm moving beyond allies to accomplices. How are they going to stand up for their minoritized colleagues when the time comes? That's the Cliff Notes.
Absolutely amazing. I'll just be quiet now. I'm going to steal that, so get ready, Teddi.
Okay, all right. We're here.
Thank you for the question. And the response as well. Does another one of our panelists have a question for someone else?
All right, I'm going to take my turn. I have a question for Ms. Motter. I love the idea of taking stuff off teachers' plates. What would you take off? Where would you start?
Well, when I think about it, I think about how there's only so much time in the day, right? So I think that to, in a sense, taking off means that you're giving time. And I don't know, I think that there's a way for us to rethink, you know, the educator's schedule. A typical schedule, at least that I've worked in two different school districts, is that you work, you know, the 6 hours, 6.5 hours with students, and then you at most might get 45 minutes of a prep time.
30 seconds.
If there was a way to add more prep time to the educator's day, so that then they would have that time to be able to make connections with families, do the additional professional development, do the grading, do the prep for their class, you know, realistically, they would need more than just double. But I think that's one way that you could take something off their plate. That means potentially you have more educators and lower class sizes, et cetera. That's how you could take something off the plates. It's costly, but it's worth the investment.
She can have my time if she needs more time.
Can I add to that?
Yes, please.
Yes, I'm going back to fully funding education so that they don't have to be the nurses. They don't have to be the counselors. They don't have to be, I don't know, everything else that they have to be in the schools, and they can just educate the students and have the time to do that. And also they're treated as professionals, and you're given 4 days before school starts, and you talk to them about being taking self-care, but you take up the 4 days with them in workshops and seeing how the school's going to run. And now they're stuck trying to figure out how they're going to get this classroom ready for our important products. And why we're here is our students to come to their class. They're working late nights or over their weekend or whatever it is. And so they're exhausted from the jump and never, ever catch up because it just keeps going. It never stops.
Thank you. Does another panelist have a question for someone else?
So, Teddi, you stole my question because I was also thinking that. So I'm going to throw one at you. You mentioned you were talking about teaching teachers what to expect with microaggressions and the experience that they're going to have when they go to schools. I really appreciate that. And I imagine you do that with your students. But how do you believe this can be operationalized so that your colleagues will do that with their students?
Oh, well, I think we really need to think about preparing teachers as preparing whole people. They're not just learning skill to go in and teach kids. I think colleges of education need to consider their students as real people and as whole people. And, you know, education is an art and a skill. It's not just teaching people how to do a running record. It's also how to be your authentic self and bring your authentic self to the classroom. We in colleges of education have to show folks that we value who they are. We do this in our program. You know, our program says if you're in our program, it's because we believe that you're going to be a good teacher.
20 seconds.
To get you there. We also say now, if you turn out not to be good for kids, we'll have a different conversation because we're also not about putting people out there to mess up other people's children. But our job is to make you be the best teacher, to get you there. And that's a holistic approach.
Thank you. Ms. Motter or Ms. ONeal, do either of you have a question for someone else?
So my question was one that was asked before about the caucusing. So I don't know if we give her more time, but I can go to Director Simmons and ask what ideas or things are we thinking about to help our newest teachers? You know, what systems are we thinking about, you know, putting in place to help them feel like they're supported? And I know we don't like the word retain, but want to stay. Is that better?
Well, no, you know, you certainly can say it, and you should say it, right? Because in my opinion, retention starts before the first day they teach. But you're part of that group, the consulting teachers. That's number one, right? And that's new to me, and I'm new to education other than school boarding. But that consulting teacher piece is a big piece. I know when they have, I forget what they call it, orientation, those before school starts. I know that we are contracting as part of the ARE program, some of those things that we're doing there, but bringing them in for all of our teachers so that they can at least prepare them. You're never fully prepared until you hit that classroom. And how do you show up with your different views, different perspectives, sort of in check, but you learn as you go. So I think there's other things that we're trying to put in place for our new teachers, affinity groups, how do I say it, but African-American affinity groups for new teachers, as well as those that are in place for experienced teachers. You know, how do we make those more effective? So there's a number of things that we have to continue to try and enhance their experience, and not just our minority teachers, but our other teachers also. So beyond, but I do think our most unique and effective piece is that group that you're a part of, that mentoring, and that person that they can call at 9 o'clock at night when they're in tears and they say, hey, I'm at my wit's end, and then you have to talk them off the cliff. So there's some trainings that we can do, but there's no training for that piece. So, but
thank you.
I'd be more than happy to listen to any additional ideas. So
thanks for those words of wisdom. Ms. Motter, any other question from you?
Well, I was going to ask, I feel like so Mr. Simmons, you said you were on the school board for Mukilteo. And I guess it made me wonder if there was anything that is happening in the Mukilteo School District that you wish you could implement in Seattle Public Schools.
You know, the districts are very, very similar. It's just size, right? And, but, you know, most people wouldn't believe that more than 50% of Mukilteo School District is free and reduced lunch. Most wouldn't believe that more than 50% of the Mukilteo School District is non-white. So, you know, we have challenges on a different scale. Many of you probably heard about the whole To Kill a Mockingbird thing, right? So that was Mukilteo. That was me in the media for 2 weeks straight. So everybody has something. The question is, how do you work through it and deal with it? And, you know, I'm a believer that communication. The more you can be out front, the less you have to be reactive. And, but, you know, everyone has a different perspective. From my board seat in Mukilteo, we have one employee. That's the superintendent. Quite frankly, that's as far as I get. And that's as far as I want to get, because you hire the superintendent because you trust him or her, in this case, it's her, to do that job. And now we want to be aligned. Doesn't mean we're always aligned, but we have to have those discussions. I think there are other boards out there, Seattle for one, where board members, in some people's opinion, are too deep into the weeds. But that's a matter of personal perspective. I just happen to have a view that's a little different. So to answer your question, I can't think of anything off the top of my head. It's just it's a different ballgame. And so I'm probably one of the fortunate ones to get to see 2 ball games almost every week. And so.
Thank you.
Thank you to all of you. We're going to shift just a moment away from our panelists and to Senator Claire Wilson, but we're going to come back to you panelists at the end, only we're going to shorten it. You're going to get a 30-second window to give a message or a closing remark or something. So be thinking about that. So welcome to you, Senator Claire Wilson. We invite you now to take a couple of minutes to tell us what themes expressed during the program tonight serve as a guide towards specific policies we could support?
Well, I just want to say, first of all, thank you so much for the amazing conversation and for my 3 pages worth of notes. So it is an honor to sit here tonight. And first, I just want to thank you all for what you do every single day. And no one's mentioned it, but the last 2 years have been extraordinarily difficult. So we've had systems of inequity for a long time, but they've just been exacerbated over the last 2 years. So the fact you're all here tonight is a testament to what I heard about drive and about passion and purpose and all those things. So first, I just want to say that, and I want to say thank you to everyone here. And I would say, oh my goodness gracious, there is so much. So funding, first and foremost, I heard. And I would say fully funding not only basic ed, but as we look at early care and education, we're the only place in the world where you got to do the wrong thing to get what you need to do it right. And if we actually provided young people and families with what they needed early on, the trajectory of those young people and the work that our teachers are left doing would look very, very different, I do believe. And so I think resource is incredibly important. That also means we have to resource and pay the people who are doing the work. And I trust teachers implicitly, and that means that we have, I heard about scripted curriculum, and I'll say I taught for 10 years. So, and there wasn't a curriculum. I walked into a classroom that had nothing in any drawer and had to create that all myself. So I think those things are important. Prototypical funding model, implementation of legislation that we've passed that now needs to be implemented with fidelity and with resource. And I think the whole issue of not only race, but also intersectionality, and not only for teachers and for staff, but also for young people. So representation matters, voice matters, access to opportunity matters. And I could go on and on and on, and we'll continue to fight for public ed, which is the only thing you need to cross that door is you've got to be a certain age by a certain date. And we've got to maintain that opportunity for all of our young people across the state.
Thank you so much, Senator Wilson, for being here tonight, listening, taking all those notes, and really reflecting on the wisdom of this group. We all appreciate that. We have one question in the chat, and I'm wondering if one of you might want to volunteer to answer it, and then we'll do the closing statement. The question is, how is civic education incorporated into your school programs and curriculum? Is there a volunteer who wants to address that?
I just say, are we going to allow this to go past 8:30? And that's so anyway.
Okay, I was trying to end it at 8:30. So anybody want to do a 30-second answer to that question? If not, we'll just move on.
I don't have a specific answer to that, but when I graduated from high school in Los Angeles in 1981, we were required to take state of California history. And I remember this yellow book. And if you didn't pass that class, you didn't graduate. So I'm not suggesting that for the state of Washington, but that was as close to civic education. That was my personal experience. So I don't know of any experience here.
Okay, thank you.
I'm just going to go on my anti-testing soapbox right now and say, if you only treasure what you measure, we don't measure civic education. We don't require that kids be literate in civics. We require them to be literate in math and reading and sometimes science. And that's what we measure. So that's what gets taught. Get rid of the tests, we'll bring back civic education.
And Dr. Beam-Conroy, I'm going to give you the first opportunity here to give a 30-second closing remark if you have one.
Yeah, I'm just excited to be here tonight. I love learning from my fellow panelists and from everyone that's spoken. I started out by saying I'm in it because I'm hopeful. I must be hopeful or crazy because I've been doing it for decades. But I know that we can change. We just have to keep at it. It's slow, and to realize that the situation, this wasn't created to serve most of us that are sitting in this room tonight. Education wasn't started for us, but we can change it. We have to change it because we are in the room.
Thank you. That's inspiring. Really is. And I come back to your opening statement of hope. They're kind of connected. Ms. Motter, what would you like to tell us for your closing statement?
Well, I was going to say that, again, I just hope that people will listen and honor the voices of those who are actually in the buildings, working with students directly, our educators, educators in all the different positions across the schools and across the district, as well as listen to our students, but especially listening to our educators and students of color. I also will just point out, a lot of people don't understand what is the role of the union. And it really has been to elevate those voices, because otherwise, normally educators, and we are a union for educators, educators don't have a seat at the table or a voice. And so that is the role of the union, is to elevate that voice, that then the people who are in the decision-making positions will listen.
Thank you, Jennifer. Ms. ONeal, what would your closing remark be?
Thank you to the League of Women Voters of Seattle and King County for inviting me to be on my first panel. Thank you to all my panelists, because I learned a lot from you and Senator Wilson. Thank you to the voters across Washington that voted yes on our school levies this year. They passed, I think, pretty much everywhere. Also, I want to say, yeah, definitely let's listen to our students, let's listen to our teachers, let's listen to the people that were there, because even with all of my experience, I did not close a school and 2 weeks later open up online. That is something that I did not do. I was there and I supported, but I did not do that. And so we got to talk to the people that's on the front lines, that are in there every day. And we have to find out what we can do better to make them more successful.
Thank you.
And
Dr. Lopez.
Katanja Brown Jackson.
Yes. Dr. Lopez.
Thank you for having me, and to my fellow panelists, just for sharing this space with me. Thank you. But given that Senator Wilson is here, I'm going to just take this opportunity to stress the importance of funding equitable access to teacher preparation programs to help diversify the profession. And I'm also going to throw a little bit of a curveball and say that public education is more than just traditional public schools. There's virtual schools, there's magnet schools, and there's charter schools. So I believe that legislature should reauthorize charter school law to allow for the diversification of public education so that families have more choices for their children, and additional innovative programs can be implemented to help the needs of culturally and linguistically diverse students.
Thank you so much. And last but not least, Director Simmons.
You know, when I got this invite, and I'm thinking, I'm talking to my friends, League of Women Voters, what could they want to hear from me? So, but first of all, I'll just say thanks to everyone. I have learned a great deal, and beyond impressed, not surprised, but beyond impressed. And, I think, as I said, or as it was read from my short bio, that, relationship is primary, and that absolutely exists in education and everywhere else. But the one thing I will say is that our teachers and our students are the most important things in our districts. The teaching job is the hardest job on earth, quite frankly, because you have you're touching the future every day with 30 or more sets of eyes. So I think if there's one thing, our teachers take joy in what they do. In my board role, I always say to folks, what does this decision mean to the teacher and the student? And if that is not on your mind, then why are we talking about it? So at the end of the day, every teacher brings a certain degree of joy, and they get a certain degree of joy every day. So if anything, Senator Wilson, If anything, maybe there's Hug a Teacher Day. It's in our near future. And you take credit for that coming from this group. That Hug a Teacher Day is well in order and maybe on an annual basis. So those would be my parting words.
And those were great parting words. Thank you. Our time is coming to an end, and I'd like everybody to put their hands together and give a virtual round of applause to our panelists, to Senator Wilson. Thank you so much for being here. And I'm going to turn this over to Joanna Cullen, our chair of League of Women Voters for South King County, who will close tonight's event. Joanna?
Hi, so is my sound, can you hear me fine? So thank you, Emilie, for moderating. And this could have gone on very much longer because I can tell that a little more depth in each question would have been helpful. And I hope that we continue our conversations with these people into the future. And I want to thank the League of Women Voter leaders and especially the staff member, Allison Fair, for making these forums possible. And thank you to tonight's volunteers, Sonatina Sanchez and Adele Reynolds. And I want to especially recognize Pat Griffith, Meg Van Wyck, Diane Ramsey, and Allison Rumberger for their work on this forum. And we love new members for our committee. And I'm not president of the League, I'm just chair of the Education Committee. So, but we love new members. And so please come and join our meeting. And you can always find those in the voter and on the website calendar. Thank you.